In today's video, we're going to discuss function machines, inputs and outputs, and function tables. So a little bit of vocabulary. The input is the number you plug into a function, and this is usually represented by the letter X. The output is the number that you get out, and this is usually represented by the variable Y. The rule is the math operation or operations you do to the input to get the output. So we can kind of think about this as a visual with a function machine. You put the input number in, some math happens, and then the output number comes out. So let's take a look at this first example. If I have an input of 1 and a function rule y equals 2x plus 3, we want to figure out what number we get out. So everywhere we see an x, we're going to replace that with the input value. So this would be 2 times 1 plus 3. So we would have y equals 2 times 1 plus 3. So that gives us y equals, we're now going to use order of operations. 2 times 1 is 2 plus 3. And we all know that y equals 2 plus 3 or 5. So my output would be 5. Right, example number 2. I have an input of -3. A rule of y equals -x minus 5, and then I'm looking for an output value. So I'm going to have y equals, I'm going to plug in -3 for x. So I have an opposite sign on the outside. There's the opposite of, remember from when we were doing evaluating expressions, when we have a negative number, we need to plug in parentheses. So we have opposite of -3 minus 5. So the opposite of -3 is +3 and minus 5. Okay, so 3 minus 5 is going to give us a value of -2. So my output here is -2. Right? Function tables work exactly the same way, except that we now no longer have our visual, and we're going to have multiple values to plug in. In this case, they're going to be 4 separate values. So what I like to do is kind of do a workspace where you do 4 in like a general areas. So for the first one, I have a -6 that's getting plugged in as my input for x. So I have y equals -6 minus 2, and that means y is equal to -6 minus 2 is -8. So then I would fill in my function table right there with a -8. Right? The next one, I have y equals -1. So y equals -1 for x minus 2. And that gives us y is equal to -3. So my output value here would be -3. Next one, my input is 2. Again, you can kind of chunk your space if you want to, so you don't get your numbers confused. Y is equal to input of 2 minus 2. And 2 minus 2 is 0, so y equals 0. And then last but not least, I have 7, so y is equal to input of 7 minus 2, and that means that my y value would be equal to 5. So my output is 5. Right? Coming on down here, next example, chunk my workspace. So I have x is -6 first, or my input is -6. So I have y equals the opposite of -6 plus 1. So the opposite of -6 is 6 plus 1, which means my output value is going to be 7. 6 plus 1 is 7. Right? Next one, I have a -1, so y is equal to the opposite of -1 plus 1. The opposite of -1 is a +1, so I have 1 plus 1. And that means my output is going to be equal to 2. Moving down, I have y is equal to the opposite of +2 plus 1. The opposite of +2 is -2, so y equals -2 plus 1. And -2 plus 1 is a -1, so my output value is -1. Last example, I have y equals the opposite of 7 plus 1. So this is going to be y equals -7 plus 1. And for my output, that's going to give me y equals -6.